Hello, everybody. I am Cenk again. You are again watching one of the sessions of Contract Foodvision broadcast series. Right now, we are making an intercontinental, let's say, video interview this time. We are going to talk about quite an critical project from my point of view. And I must also say hello from here to Evren, who introduced us to each other. And we are going to talk about the project called Corporate Vortex. And before getting into that, I just want you to present yourselves and to tell us a little what are your main ambitions, and what do you work on. Basically, okay. Who wants to start?
Okay. Silvia, go ahead, Silvia.
Silvia, go ahead. Silvia.
Oh, it's up to me. I'm waiting. Yes. Sure. So I will start. Yeah. I'm a designer by training, and I worked with woodworking, not so much related to urban studies, but my master's was focused on urban practice and urban research. And that's when I got interested mostly by food, which is the main topic of this project. And also coming from here in Brazil, my grandparents do live in a farm, and they raise their children, my aunts, out of a farm. And this also always got me intrigued. So I feel my interest comes from a mix of personal, familiar background and research on urban field and putting design in this mix. So visualizing complex things, complex relations, and also visualizing data is something that got me really interested in this intersection between research and my interests. Yeah, that's
great. And Gamar, maybe you want to continue?
Yeah, why not? I'm Gamar. I'm from Lebanon. And now that Silvia was talking about her, the fact that she actually grew up in a farm, it made me remember that I also grew up on a farm, and I rarely get to talk about that. So I think I studied landscape architecture before switching to urban design. So I already have some sort of a connection to land and agriculture in general, and it has always sparked my interest in food and farming. But of course, when I was growing up in that context, I never thought about it as something that it can be something political or something critical in my life. And so when I switched to urban design or urban practice here at Parsons, I got the opportunity to think about farming in general as a critical practice. And I also got to work with a lot of markets in Ecuador, through which I understood further the modes of production of agriculture and then how that affects cities in general. So it's a mix of so many things that kind of led me to like the topic of food and politics. And other than the fact that I myself cook so much and I love eating, so it's a subject that it's an everyday, it's a mundane subject that we get to play around with. So I like it.
Cool. Shibani?
Yes. Hi, my name is Shibani. I'm originally from India, currently in New York with Gamar. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to repeat what Silvia and Gamar said, but I completely resonate with them when it comes to growing up in a setup where you grow something and you eat, you consume that instead of your food being produced in some other part of the world and it being consumed in a different part. So that's something that even I was introduced to during my master's program in design and urban ecologies. And I also have a background in information visualization or data visualization. So when we got to work on this project, it was a great opportunity to use both these skills or set of knowledge to visualize something.
Mm. It is always so fun to see how our childhood affects almost everything, whatever we want to deal with during our lifetime, right? Interesting, because when you grow up in that kind of agricultural life related environment, it is quite obvious for us how plants grow, how animals grows and feed by people, and then how you eat them, or how you prepare food out of them, or those kind of stuff. They are always there, always evident, and always obvious. But I know right now, for example, this packaged water issue, bottled water, plastic bottled water is a big thing. It's a quite big sector in Turkey. I remember myself, going to a fountain and, just fill up bottles with my grandparents. So that water was for free and for everybody. But I don't think that there aren't many children left in Turkey who remember that kind of opportunity. I think all think that water is something bottled and served by some people to the houses with this 20 kilogram or 20 liters or 15 liters plastic bottles. So it's quite interesting. Of course, if you
Let's contextualize.
Well, yeah, definitely. Yeah, something like that.
We could have
For
a model
sure.
to talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah. This video interview will be full of demonstrations, as you can understand, people. But starting from there, maybe we can gradually get into the research and also exhibition project that you made together. But before that, maybe you can talk a little about the work of Roxy Paine and how you relate your work corporate Vortex. Then I really want to do the research process of it.
You this time.
So
Gamar,
yeah, I don't know if we can do justice with a quick explanation of Roxy Paine's piece, but it is called the Dinner of the Dictators, and he has done a lot of research around what type of food 12 different dictators were consuming, and then what or like what dictators eat in general, and then he has positioned them around a table with 12 different meals, each meal representing the dictator. For example, if you look at Stalin's meal, it's a full piece of chicken versus if you look at Hitler's, because he had a sensitive stomach, his meal is a tiny meal with a little piece of bread and with some
laxatives and
laxative pills and
capsules which have ingredients of feces of Bulgarian peasants, which is the most absurd thing in the exhibit, according to me.
So basically, he just humanizes. I mean, he reminds us that dictators, although they have a lot of power, that they exercise over their own countries and greater geographies. That's a reminder of the fact that they are humans. They eat, they sleep, they go to the bathroom. It's just this humanizing factor of those dictators, and I think it's very symbolic. I mean, his work is very symbolic, and it's open to interpretation to whoever goes around that table. So yeah.
And I think he conducted research over a time period of 2 years. So he started working in 1993 on this project and completed it in 1995. So just it shows the amount of time and the depth in which he did his research to come up with this piece.
Mm. In your project, especially, you approach to the companies, corporate companies, like entities similar to, in a way, dictators, right? So can you open it up a little bit? You know, what do you mean with
Silvia,
that?
that was an initial idea from Silvia. I think she'd be best to describe that.
Okay, Sylvie.
If
Yes,
we
when
lost her.
our initial call was to give a response to Roxy Paine's piece, and we thought about different things. We thought about having the pizza, like the workers' table instead of the dictators' table. So shifting a little bit the narrative and showing another perspective. But then bringing it to present times, we were thinking about who would be the present, who are the current, not individuals, but actors dictating what is food and what we consume. So what are the current food dictators? That's what drove us to think about corporations, actually. I was really impressed by a graphic, just like a visualization I've seen, that places 10 big brands and then all the ramifications, all the 10 big companies, right? And then all the brands that those companies own. And if you look around your house, or at least me looking around my house, I could identify that most of the things I consumed, many of the things at my place came from those 10 big companies. So this concentration of power and so explicit relation to food and dictating what we eat, that's what drove us to see those corporations as the current dictators. This was the first idea that we discussed, and then we developed this into domination and expansion of those companies, and that's what we attempted to track and show in the corporate vortex. So it's basically a timeline of expansion and accumulation. The visualization, the arms of this big vortex show the accumulation of brands and some events along the way for the 3 different companies we chose. And a map shows the actual production expansion, like the physical expansion of production.
Yeah, do you have anything to add, Shibani and Gamar, to that?
I think one, so like Silvia mentioned, there were like 10 brands which kind of dictate the urban or the agricultural landscapes all over the world. But we had to like narrow down to 3 given the time period and in which we had to execute this. So the way in which we took that decision was we thought about 3 basic crops that are the basic ingredients in most of what we eat today. So that's when we thought about sugarcane, corn, and coffee. And that kind of helped us to narrow down the corporations to Kellogg's, Coca Cola, and Nestlé.
And I also wanted to say that this we have a fourth partner in this project who is Christopher London. He is faculty at Milano School of Public Affairs here at the New School. And it was an in-depth conversation with Chris and Silvia and the curators of the gallery here around these topics. So we shouldn't forget the fact that we had so many other people around to collaborate as well on this. And then it made the conversation richer because when Silvia came up with the idea of, okay, let's represent dictators as they are now, and they usually take the form of corporations. Christopher London stepped in and he gave so many references around this topic because he also teaches food and politics here at the New School. And he brought in very nice references of the octopus as a representation of capitalism and the tentacles of the octopus, and then how that octopus kind of grabs everything along the way for the sole purpose of accumulation and further accumulation and further accumulation. So we were very much inspired by the octopus, and the vortex itself. Also, we had conversations of how, you know, we think about the sun and then how the planets rotate around the sun. We always represent it as a 2D representation, but it's actually something that moves into the space. And then that was a reference as well when we were working on the piece. And then the third reference was Foucault's panopticon, how there's always in the center and they can always see us, but us, we never have a way to see them and how they control the situation. And that is very representative of corporations, how they hide everything for the sole purpose of keeping us ignorant about their processes, and then how we fall into this trap and get locked in that corporate vortex that has been accumulating throughout the years to make that, you know, central piece. So yeah, that's
I was about to ask why those three crops, you know, you already mentioned that, you know, they are extremely widespread at the end and consumed in big scale, or, you know, in bigger scale if you compare with the other goods. But maybe it can be also interesting what type of other crops or what other corporations that you come up that you know, quite effective on this issue. Not only these three, but also can you give 2 or 3 more examples of those corporations that are in that list? Because it can be also quite interesting, you know, not in detail, but maybe you want to mention it to make it more open.
One of the biggest for me, other than these 3, is Unilever. They have quite a lot of brands within their parent brand.
You also have Procter and Gamble, which is a huge corporation. But
Kraft food.
It's
Kraft food as well.
Yeah.
Kraft is another one. PepsiCo is another one.
Johnson and Mars.
But I mean, in relation to your question, Cheng, you were saying the reason we focused, maybe it was easier to focus on these crops because you find those ingredients easily, for like corn syrup and sugar is in every single product. But it is true that we didn't, for example, venture into not only crops, but like the meat industry, although we had the chance to talk about these things, but it doesn't translate into huge corporations. I'm assuming. I'm not really necessarily sure about that.
It's also some kind of, you know, quite complicated issue, right? When it comes to the meat, industrial produced meat, it is also quite strange because its own supply chain is maybe much more complicated than any kind of industrial product which is produced to be consumed as food or something like that, because it's another issue too. Did you can you also talk a little about the design process of the exhibition, or the design, the exhibition design of the work of your research? Do you want to say something about it?
Gamar.
I mean, there's so many threads and design decisions that went into the project. So to mention firstly that the corporate vortex is not a singular piece. It has complementary pieces. There is a time lapse of a map of 3 world maps that shows the expansion of the companies and how they begin to have their factories located in or set up in different countries in the world. And then you see that in 2014 or 2015, the whole world gets colored because they're everywhere. They're everywhere. They've dried up everything. So they've exploited all the landscapes. So that's one piece. And then there's the corporate vortex. And then there are two little booklets, not so little, A3 size booklet, three A3 size booklets that have all the information and research that Silvia and Chris and Shibani populated. So in terms of design, so these are the three pieces of the vortex. I could talk about the vortex, but you can chime in with the different pieces.
No, I just wanted to say that from the beginning, we always wanted to make this, even though there's a thin line between an art piece and a data visualization, and we wanted to keep a balance between both, even though a lot of the audience looks at it as an art piece, but it's very much a data visualization where the cards on the wall are data points on the timeline. But the booklets that Gamar mentioned are the data set behind those data points. So if someone is interested in a particular card and wants to know why it's there, they can always go back and refer to the booklets to see why the card is there, what's the information behind it. So it's like one has to really engage and interact with the timeline to know things in detail or explore it in their own way.
Yeah, to take one step back, if you look at the vortex, as Silvia said, the vortex has 3 tentacles, and then each tentacle is a timeline. It starts with the histories of the crops themselves, and then how the corporation gets incorporated into that timeline, and how the landscape shifts completely. And it's very interesting because while we were designing, we were having trouble locating thousands of years of history of agriculture into a tiny little piece of the tentacle, because the corporations have way more information when it comes to their acquisitions, their histories, their social histories. It's crazy to put, first of all, these into comparison, like the history of the crop versus the history of the corporation, overshadowing those crops and production landscapes. So that was challenging in the case of the design of this vortex. And then we also wanted to give a face to these corporations. That's when we decided to have the portraits of the board of directors of these, or CEOs of these companies, because at the end of the day, if you want to hold them accountable to the devastations that they're doing worldwide, you have to know who the CEO is, so you can hold the CEO accountable. And then we at one point, Silvia, say.
Just one thing to relate to what Gamar was saying, this tension between how do we portray the history of crops and the corporations. I feel we were really strict on having data and having the sources we have. It was really a big research to get to that visualization, but some of the things we had to put in abstract as well. We know that these corporations control a big portion of the crops currently, and we know that there is a point in history when this started to happen, and they influence a lot the way these crops are grown, and farming has changed a lot because of these corporations. But that's something much more difficult to capture in images or any other way. So the lines as well, the tentacles, oh gosh, those arms are formed by an intricate design of lines, and they get denser, like there are more lines as more brands are added to that company. And also it's a way to show the company taking over that particular crop. When you get to the center, you can barely see the crop line that was the first thing, like the only thing in the very beginning of the arm. So we tried to capture there the percentages, or how dominating the companies can be over farming and over the crops as well, in a different way, not in graphs but in the visual representation of.
What was your personal reaction right after you made the visualization, or when you started to collect all the data? Did you scare? Did you amaze? Or what was your personal reaction to that?
Okay, I think I speak to the three of us that when we graduated from design and urban ecologies, these are issues that we talk about already. So the visualization was not necessarily something that was impactful from that perspective, but sometimes you read details that you didn't know about companies, and that's where you go like, fuck, how is it? How is this possible? And then there are very, very beautiful histories within those companies that I didn't even think about. For example, Kellogg's is a family company, right? And then up until maybe the mid-50s, they weren't really thinking about their company as a corporation. And then they got ridiculed by other corporations by saying, you're not a successful corporation. And then that switched the mentality of Kellogg's and said, okay, in order to survive in this corporate world, we need to become a corporation. And then they started acquiring all these. So you have little stories that are really, I mean, I think for me it's shocking and interesting because we don't think about these things when we eat cornflakes in the morning. And then we have the privilege to dive into these stories and then actually make it visible to people like us. And I hope it's shocking for everyone when they see this. I hope it is scary, and I hope it conveys some sort of a message.
Yeah.
I think, just picking up on what Gamar said, we very much felt part of that timeline while we were doing the research, because we consume these products and there are some brands that you have no clue that these companies own. Like, for example, something random like L'Oreal is owned by Nestlé. Like, it's not even a food company. And they have all these companies have like water bottling plants. So for example, Portland Spring is owned by Nestle, but a water brand called Dasani is owned by Coca Cola. So it's like the different ways in which they have like infiltrated our lives.
Yeah.
So
I don't know what this is.
that's where the centerpiece kind of comes in play, where we thought we had to like humanize it and make it personal to every person who is seeing it. So the center of the Vortex, which is like a calm space and all the craziness with the tentacles and the events, is like three people sitting on a table. One is having a cup of coffee, one is having a bowl of Kellogg's, and one is drinking Coke. So it's just like, again, goes back to the dinner of the dictators, where it's like three people having a meal or a drink together, but there's all this history and hidden history and craziness or messiness that's behind this.
Yes, and just
Silvia?
coming back to your question of how we felt, I think we somehow saw it coming because we planned it so much, and like mock-ups and AutoCAD drawings and line after line. So we knew how it would look like, but I hope it amazes people who see it for the first time. That's a feeling we wanted to get out of people when we were planning the design of this. And I'm not disappointed. This is not a word at all, but I think it looks beautiful. And somehow I wanted it to look not less beautiful, but just more overwhelming because I feel it's easy to stop and appreciate the lines and everything, but then it just conveys so much messiness and so much overwhelming information. So yeah, I'm very happy for the way it looks. I just think it captures first for like the shapes, and then you start to dive in and find the information there. So I hope
just want
people are getting these reactions.
Just to add to what you said, Silvia, for example, when Chris talks about the vortex, he always refers to the fact that it's beautiful, and and that's like our entices people, but that's also a branding strategy that companies use. Beautiful colors, beautiful advertisements, and he kind of relates the beauty of the vortex or the aesthetics of the vortex as also some sort of a captivating comparison to how companies advertise themselves. I don't know if that makes sense, but I agree with you. The aesthetics of the piece kind of takes away from from the fact that it's scary, but when
Uh-huh.
people just stand in front of it for a couple of minutes, they realize. I mean, when they see the African American baby in the bottle of the milk that Nestlé is trying to advertise, and they know that this is not necessarily healthy for newborn babies. I think that's very impactful. So you have very beautiful moments within the timelines that are I think impactful. Yeah.
That's an interesting relation, because yeah, there is this point that the history as a whole is beautiful somehow, and if you go, one of our main source of information was the company's websites and their timelines of their own histories, and this looks beautiful, and they say how much they have contributed to many things. And in Nestlé's website they even mentioned the boycotts they received. So yeah, in general, those stories are portrayed as beautiful things. So yeah, thinking from this side, the scary part is there. You just have to look for it in the overall impressing aesthetics of it. Yes.
I just have two things to say, just to finish the design process of it. I feel there are two main characteristics or elements of the Vortex. One is the yarn itself. So we were having this discussion, and in one of the meetings, we had Daniel and Daisy who helped us in the initial installation. They were Daniel and Daisy, the ones who like drilled all the 450 something screws on the wall.
Oh my God.
400 screws. So we were talking about how to create the density as the timeline comes closer to the center and still have porosity and show all the layers and stuff like that. So that's when Daniel came up with an idea, and he suggested, why don't you look at string or string art and things like that. So that's when we researched and thought about using yarn to create that density over time. The other thing is the cards itself. So Gamar and Silvia were having a conversation one day, and they were thinking of how do we like print these things, print these small pockets of information. So initially we were like thinking about printing like huge sheets and put it on the wall, but then they thought of why not create cards.
A deck of cards.
A deck of cards. So then it's more tactile.
It's more tactile. It's easier to archive. You can use it as a tool for education. You can. So once it's off the wall, it's not a rolled up paper that you stack somewhere and then you never look at it again. But
a deck of cards.
With a lot of rich information.
And it becomes more interesting to interact also, or like play around with when we were installing it.
Oh yeah, the way we were shuffling it, it was the installation itself was a process. It was really nice.
Yeah, and the cards idea is also quite interesting, because you can also take it with you. You know, you can carry that information with you, maybe if you are allowed. I don't know, but it's also quite related to this thing that you said, Gamar. You said that that you used the faces of the CEOs or board of directors as the image representation of those companies. And then you also mentioned the history of the corporation Kellogg's, because maybe until that time that they started to turn into some kind of corporation, they saw themselves as individuals, the family members, who are on the board. They see themselves as individuals who are creating that company, basically. So they are their own identity was the actually identity of that company directly. But then when they started to create this abstract corporate identity, then it became something anonymous. And then maybe also it allows people, not only them, not only the family members, but then also the other people who started to be responsible for the company, it allowed them to remain anonymous while making decisions.
Absolutely.
Then it's also creates some kind of ambiguous environment where these people can remain hidden while they are making this quite strange, sometimes inhuman, sometimes anti-environmental decisions, maybe. So it's also quite important to again make it public who is behind of those decisions, those companies, because I think it's also some kind of corporate identity representation technique to create some kind of abstract, totally abstract image of a company, which we cannot directly relate ourselves. We can relate ourselves in many ways, but we cannot relate ourselves with those companies as characters like humans or something like that. We always know there will be some kind of distance that we cannot relate ourselves, etc. Because that's why it was also quite important from my point of view, that detail in your work.
Now that you're saying this, it reminds me of something, because actually, the food we consume and our diets, for example, are very much a decision of companies. Like, who said that we need to consume 50% carbs and 30% protein and I don't know what? Like, the corporations have not only become our doctors, they have become our nutritionists. They have become our everything. I mean, yes, they've changed our landscapes. They've changed our behaviors. It's funny that in the way it get individualized. So it's exactly, so it's not only their face, it's like they influence any daily behavior that we've come to exist in.
I remember there was an article when we came out, when we were doing the research, that one of the company had actually funded an institution which did research on food and health.
Exactly.
And how that funding influenced the results of the research, and how we relate obesity to food and stuff like
that. Before making this video interview with you, I made this interview with this initiative called Stockholm Food Movement, and they were talking about making the whole system visible to understand how things work, basically, in the food industry. Because as you said, it is not only how you produce the food, but it's also related how you deliver it, and it's at the same time it's also related to the health industry or health health system, healthcare system. And it is also related to the medical sectors. It's also related to social media, etc. Because social media also force us to go towards some kind of specific directions when it comes to consume stuff. So that's why it's also important. They mentioned that we need to see the whole system, even though it is quite difficult. We need to whole system more clear to understand, and then maybe to get into action. Otherwise, something will be always disregarded, they said. And it was also, I think, something parallel that you said right now.
And another thing is still related to those faces there and to the whole system vision. It's very interesting and intriguing how many of those people are also sitting in other board of directors of other companies, sometimes inside the food world as well, but sometimes it's like ExxonMobil or Shell or some university. So there is like this whole picture is also sometimes we see same faces in the whole picture as well, faces repeating in different board of directors, or same people taking decisions for different very important and aspects of our life. So that's interesting. That's another piece of information very important that Chris London got to us, that he saw somewhere this information that some 100 people are controlling the food. Like few people, relatively few, are in charge of. They just change from food company to food company, and in the end, they have been taking the decisions for years, shifting from company to company, and then being related to other very important corporations as well. So that's a strange mix somehow, but that's how the decisions are made.
Cheng, I wanted to reflect on what you were saying as well, that, you know, you have to represent the system. And again, I think our practice has taught us that you need to think about things relationally and dialectically, and those forms of representations exist also in a lot of our work outside of the corporate vortex as well. So we've dived into so many supply and value chains to understand urban change. We have looked into migratory patterns in relation to food, or in relation to land dispossession. So I absolutely agree with a form of representation that's very systemic, and it's, I mean, again, going back to this representation being scary, because yes, you look at the system and you don't know where to begin to take action, because they're so strong as corporations that what type of change do you even suggest? And sometimes I see hopeful solutions around the world, like the landless workers movement in Brazil, or Genuino Clandestino in Italy. So yeah, the question is, where do you begin the change? How do you begin to envision a counter action to this? I think that's what's scary.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But what gave me hope today, at least, again, you know, these interviews, because I get in touch, you know, different people from different places, and if some of them are like network providers, right? Some of them they just create a platform for the people who are organizing this, let's say, alternatives, and they are not creating these alternatives in an intellectual way. They are not only writing on those kind of stuff, but they're actually living that alternative. So actually, there is a reality which is not working in the way that corporations perceived or corporations wanted to create. There is a reality which is working in itself, a more democratic, more equal, and more just. This is also quite amazing, because I don't know, you know, whenever you look around yourself, as you said while we started to have this interview, you know, these corporations are everywhere. All the products are, you know, they just all around of us. But then there are actually other realities in that reality that that is wanted to be shaped by these corporations. So it is also some kind of I don't know, you know, it's a good point to grab and try to pull ourselves up into some kind of much more proactive position. That's true. That's true. But how do you think? How do you see this extreme popularization, let's say, of the issue of food? Because you know, corporations were there. Food issue was always there. You know, famine, overconsumption, overproduction, to lack of resources, etc. It was always there, but maybe also it is my perception of the topic, but any kind of issues related to food became interestingly popular. How do you see it? or is it popular? I don't know.
I definitely think it is become more popular, or maybe I've become more aware of it, of the movement. That's why I think it's more popular now, maybe. But I feel awareness is one big factor that's playing in. So people are being more aware of um, how corporations are taking over our daily lives or influencing our daily lives, not just in terms of food, but in other aspects of our lives too, like from clothing to, I don't know, it just like subtly infiltrating in our daily lives. So I think like food is also a big factor in that. And yeah,
I think Roxy Paine captures this topic beautifully, because he puts dictators around something that we do every day, is eat. We all know, and we all know that food brings people together. It's the easiest thing. It's not the it's the So if you are advertising a party, let's say, the minute you say there's food, everyone shows up.
Yeah, that's true.
Free food, everyone shows up. It's something that brings people together. It's an easy topic. It's an interesting topic. It's part of your daily life. It's something you can relate to necessarily, and it seems like it's also offering so many alternatives recently to many issues. And I mean, intuitively, I was driven towards food, but then it's something so essential in our lives that I think it's only normal that it has become popular, and as a way of a medium through which you can, I mean, I don't know, work or talk about these things. And it's very basic. It's very basic. It comes from the earth. It's I don't know.
No, but I think like for our generation, because we like all of us have like grown up seeing food being like come out of the soil and being grown in front of our eyes, and then us consuming it. But someone like my nephew, who is the next generation, like I see that being born in a city and being raised up in a city, he has no, I mean, the first time he saw a cow live, because he'd always seen a smaller one as a toy, but when he saw a real one, a real life size cow, he was intimidated and scared. So that's when, like, that was a moment in my life where I thought, like, wow, like what I got growing up, it's something different, and that the next generation is not going to be so in touch with what they are consuming, or what we assume to be part of our daily lives.
And also, one thing I learned while I was writing my thesis is with Tate Mandler, is that, you know, a lot of the stories begin with land and how farmers got dispossessed, and then the culture of cultivation is disappearing. The landscapes are becoming more corporate. It's only natural to go back to the root, and the root is the land, and the land is where we grow food, and it's only natural to start with food, to even begin to discuss issues like dispossession and migration and urban development. Look what's happening in China. All agricultural lands are disappearing because you have so much money to invest in real estate, that even in real estate that's hollow and empty and meaningless, you're driving away farmers, you're driving away the culture of agriculture. So if I'm assuming, if you want to talk about these issues, go back to the root, and then the root is the land.
It's also, you know, while you are talking, I was thinking that we are also extremely focused on cities, right? You know, we are always focused on urbanized environments. We rarely think about the rural areas. And as you said, the source of the production, you know, the fields and all other places. In a way, we are. I am quite distanced from that production in my everyday life. But more and more, we forget about rural areas, especially, and the discussion begins there, because. When the knowledge about the rural area disappears, knowledge or awareness on rural areas disappears, then that kind of empty space has been filled by of investors, etc., who wants to produce something, and then wants to make some kind of profit out of that. I recently read that, for example, because of these regulations in USA, the how they call it, the support from the state to the ones who are growing corn and those kind of goods. There is this high support, and then it turned into some kind of export. They turned into export goods to Mexico, and then because of the cheap price of that corn, the farmers in Mexico they cannot survive, and they had to sell their lands. And all of these people, thousands or hundred thousands of people who can basically sustain their life, their own life by themselves with that act of farming, they became like homeless or quite let's say poor people, and then they have to leave their villages. They have to sell whatever they do have. And then they started to go to the cities to search for jobs. And of course, there are not many jobs in this city, so they wanted to go to USA to search for job opportunities and other stuff. Then it becomes itself some kind of problem in USA. But the whole source of the problem is totally related to agriculture and totally totally related to the regulation of the agricultural system at the end. And it turns into some kind of tool in the politics at the end. And to see it is quite strange at the same time, because
that's what Harvey calls accumulation by dispossession. It's exactly what he describes, that you dispossess farmers, and that's your strategy for accumulation and growth.
Yeah, that's true.
I wanted to say that I have to leave, but you can continue the conversation.
We can also finish if you because
I don't mind if you continue without my face. I just wanted to say thank you for this lovely conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Around topics that we love to talk about.
Yeah, I will also connect you with the other people that I make the interview, so you can have the list of all network at the end.
That would be great.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to run fast, so
We'll
catch up later.
Okay.
Really
Bye
nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Gamar. Yeah. Silvia, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, okay. Maybe we can sum up this conversation, this lovely conversation, and maybe you can just, you and Shibani, you both can tell me your ideas of this term, let's say food innovation, after all that experience or research that you've gone through with your project. What do you think about it? How do you understand that term?
Food innovation. You wanna go, Shibani?
I think it's a topical solution. Just I can't run away for to go to work. I think the word innovation is such a topical solution to everything that it gets your brain diverted from looking into the core issue.
Yeah,
okay,
that's
bye
true.
bye.
Bye bye.
It's like design thinking.
Bye, Gamar. There is one thing from the research and from digging so deep into the company's histories. They talk a lot about food innovation, and I feel it's a word that brings some change in mindset. It's an expression that brings some change in mindset, because it's this technocrat thing as well, like who is doing the innovation and who is capable of innovating regarding food, what type of innovation, because farmers in a sense have been innovating how they grow things, and like a different way of what we consider innovation. innovation, and much of this is dismissed now for different types of innovation. So one of the things that I think it's Kellogg's is that they were the first to add nutrients to a food. So into nutrients and then isolating those things and then adding those things to other, so the superfoods of like added a small coffee with added all the things, iron and calcium and vitamins and things like that. So I think it's a tricky term that dismisses some sort of more related to the land knowledge. And after all, what we were discussing, food is a lot of our relation to the land. In the end, is food in terms of transfer of energy and transfer of nutrients. It's like this cycle. So I feel this term, the way it's used, it dismisses a lot of this part and then puts a lot of more light into the laboratorial part of it, of how after it's produced somehow, after it's detached from the land, it can be manipulated and isolated and then added to other things. So yeah, I don't know where the term is going. I just feel there have been some terms, and this one I feel has this technical, technocratic aspect to it. That's what bothers me a bit, and yeah, keeps me uncomfortable about this term.
Shibani?
For me, it sounds very much like design thinking. So
good point.
And I feel like, yeah, and I feel like food innovation would, if it has to make any change, it would make change in the way we consume products. But I don't see it making any difference or influencing the production part of it, or even like linking, bridging the increasing gap between production and consumption. And I feel that's where the focus should be, like, how are we producing, who is producing, where is it being produced, and then the consumption part. But I feel like food innovation is focusing more towards on consumption, like what is it that we are consuming in terms of nutrition and stuff like that.
Yeah, thank you for being a part of this series of video interviews. Thank you so much, and thank you for the great work. And I will definitely share some pictures of it. You know,
thank you. Yeah,
to enrich.
It was great conversation and great project.
Thank you so much.
Do you want me to take you through it right now quickly?
That would be perfect. Let's do it.
Okay. I'll just... So we have like a legend card.
Yeah.
So every card, if you see, has a symbol and the region. So we have legend card that people can take and walk around and study the cards. And on the behind, you have like what region the event took place in. And these are the booklets. So it gives you the year, the card, and the information that's behind the card. And this is the visualization.
Yeah, it's a huge installation.
Yeah, it's about 11 meters in width.
Great. So these are the profiles of the board of the And who are they in the middle?
So if you see, like, the timeline is very diverse in terms of the history and where the history is happening geographically.
Yeah.
Directors, it's very like American faces that you see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing in terms of agricultural landscape is you'll see, like, for example, sugarcane was first found in Philippines, then it traveled to India, where it was initially refined. So you'll see its relation to slavery and movement of people during this time of slavery, and how sugarcane was also an integral part of that movement. And also how they branded it then. So you see this bowl actually says East India sugar, not made by slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you see, like, this is when Coke was introduced, and then you will see, like, the change in which the aesthetical change of the landscape in which sugarcane is produced. And if you see that, it's, so this is corn, that was sugarcane, this is corn.
Yeah.
And this is coffee.
Yeah.
So it's how it, like, all these look similar now, and it's like the corporations have changed the aesthetics of these agricultural landscapes too.
Yeah.
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 Great work. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being a part of it again. And I hope to see you soon.
Yes.
For any
Yes.
reason. Yeah.
It was nice talking to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.